Hey everybody, welcome to the TikTok Take with Doug Pagitt. Really excited about this podcast today. It's a talk version of the TikTok Take. The talk today is going to be the style where I'm talking to a group of people. So far in the podcast, you've heard the talk versions where I talk with someone. I'm going to be talking with a number of fine guests and very wonderful people over the next couple of weeks. But this one, it's me talking the whole time to other people. It's a presentation that I did at a church. And it was a sermon that was based on a book that I wrote called Flipped. If you're not yet familiar with Flipped, I'd encourage you to think about it. I think you'd like it. If you like this podcast at all, if you like anything that I've ever done, if you like goodness and puppies and kindness, if you like love and sunshine and all things of wonderful flavors and visions of beauty, if you like any of that, you're going to like Flipped. You can pick it up at a bookseller near you. Barnes & Noble has them. Amazon.com. They have them both Kindle versions and paper versions, however you like it. So anyway, this is a sermon that I did on this book called Flipped. And I really like the sermon. I think it's really captures the essence of the book. It's not all that long, the sermon itself. I mean, it's long for a sermon, but, it's 30 minutes or so. I hope you enjoy it. I'd like to introduce you to some music that I like or some things I'm thinking about. And there's a song that I'm going to start the podcast with called Guiding Light. Foy Vance is his name. He's somebody I'd really like to meet someday. So if by chance you happen to know him, tell him he's got a big fan in me. This is a song that I heard a day or two before my 100-mile run in November. I ran 100 miles in one race and one run. And if you don't know about all that stuff, you don't have to worry too much about it. But anyway, it took me 27 hours. And this particular song came on, I think, maybe at mile 75 or something. I didn't listen to any music for the first 50 miles. The whole race took me, this 27 hours. So for about 13 or 14 hours, I didn't listen to any music. And then I saved it up for when I was going to be in the midst of the night and going into the early morning. The race started at 8 a.m. So getting close to, the nighttime, I started listening to music, and this song came on, and it just enraptured me. It captured the essence of the run. If you know the song already, you'll know the lyrics. If not, you may want to go back and listen to it a couple of times. It just captures the whole idea, and the passion and the way the song is sung. It's really terrific. So I cry when I listen to it. I was crying when I was listening to it on an airplane today, and made me swap out the song I was going to play because I just thought this song moves me. I cry a lot when I'm on airplanes listening to music. It's this thing that happens to people. Most of us don't tell anyone about it, so we don't know that other people also cry when they're on airplanes. I'm not much of a crier in normal situations, but you put me on an airplane and the right music in my ears, any Bruce Springsteen song, or certainly this Guiding Light, and I'm crying. It can be very uncomfortable and disheartening for the people I'm sitting next to as well. There's a lot of fear around what people do on airplanes, and so when somebody starts, weeping sitting next to them for no apparent reason, it kind of makes the passengers uncomfortable, but I can't seem to help myself. So here it is, Guiding Light, and then after that sermon I did with my good friends out at East Lake Church in Seattle area. Really great people, really great church. So a little sermon called, You Know What You Are? You're the light of the world. And I think it really captures the essence of what I think about spirituality, humanity, God, and also enjoy the song, maybe enjoy the book Flipped, and enjoy the podcast. Thanks for listening. Really appreciate it.
Well, the road is wide and waters run on either side. My shadow in the fading light is stretching out towards the night. Cause the sun is low, and I hear there's still so far to go. And my lonely heart is beating so. Tired of the wander, there's a sign ahead, though I think it's the same one again. But I'm thinking about my only friend, so I'll find my way home. 'Cause when I need to get home, you're my guiding light. You're my guiding light. When I need to get home, you're my guiding light. You're my guiding light.
Oh, well, the air is cold, and yonder lies my sleeping soul. By the branches spoke like bones. Oh, this weekend tree no longer holds. Well, the night is still, and I have not yet lost my will. Though I will keep on moving till I find my way home. When I need to get home, you're my guiding light. You're my guiding light. When I need to get home, you're my guiding light. You're my guiding light.
Hey, my name is Doug Pagitt, and I'm thrilled to be with you. A couple weeks ago, we started talking about this whole notion and this idea of Jesus saying, "You've heard it said, but I say to you," this great grand flip that happens. I think it's crucial for how we think about our spirituality and our growth and our life and who we are in the world. And are we people who see the benefit of changing our minds? Are we people who see the benefit of being called to a new story that we run in our heads and then that affects the way that we live our lives? One of the ones of these famous, "You've heard it said, but I've said to you," that I want to chat about today is Jesus using the phrase, "You are the light of the world." For many of us, this is a phrase that would come without much conflict to it or much suspense around it. It's the kind of thing that sounds totally Jesus-y to say, right? To say to people like, "You are the light of the world, and let your light shine, and don't hide it under a shade or a basket, and let it shine on all people." But when Jesus says that in the first century, it's not taken as one of those, "Oh, that's such a classic-y Jesus things to say. I'm glad he says things like that." It was taken as an act of heresy. It was shocking that someone would suggest this. It was shocking enough that followers of Jesus were saying about Jesus that Jesus was the light of the world. That was a big deal. To suggest that Jesus was the light of the world was actually to suggest that Jesus somehow was equal to Torah. So if you can put yourself in the first century for a minute and know that at the time of Jesus, there is no Christian story yet. It's all the Jewish story for Jesus' family and the people that Jesus is around. And Torah is referred to as the light of God. It is the very word in the Hebrew means the light of God. So people would speak about Torah being a light unto your path. It's the way you would find life and light in the world. Those two words go together. In our language, we love to talk about light and life as being different things, but they're really quite similar things. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in Jesus' day, for his followers to have suggested that Jesus was the light of the world was scandalous. So for Jesus to step that up again and to suggest that people are the light of the world, it's almost as if we want to say to Jesus, "You're the light of the world," and Jesus wants to say right back at you, "You too are the light of the world." That changed so much and put so much implication and put so much power in this idea that humanity and God were in this great interplay, in this great interchange with one another. So for the Jews, they would have been so confident that God wants to provide light that would shine from the community of life, from the temple, from Torah, that would give light to the world. So when Jesus comes along and people start saying, "Oh, we actually think Jesus is the light of the world," or Jesus says of himself, "I'm the light of the world," or lots of the other things that Jesus would say, if you're familiar with it, like, "I'm the bread," or "I'm the door," or "I'm the way," or "I'm the truth," or "I'm the life," these kinds of phrases, those were all not just like Jesus coming up with little nicknames. It was Jesus saying all the things that have been said about Torah, all the things that have been said about the official version of religion, all the things that have been said about the way that God plays out in the world, all of those same things you can say about me. Now, you have to put yourself in the spot that this is well before the 300s when people start talking about Jesus being God in some substantial way or some substantive way. This is a guy, a traveling prophet, a traveling rabbi, a traveling preacher who's whipping up people and saying, "All the things you say about your religion, I think are really true about me." And then he goes one step further and says, "And I think it's true about all of you as well." It was so scandalous. Like we will read, this is one of the things Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, and you can read this very famous sermon of Jesus's and just let this slide right by. You're the light of the world. People don't think a thing of it. I have a friend named Michael Dowd, and Michael is committed to talking about the connection between Christianity and evolution. He calls it evolutionary Christianity. And he has this great way of describing the world. I want to read it to you. He says, "What I want to call people to is the big history." He says it like this: "Big history is a way to think about the history of the universe and our place in it. Big history includes everything from the first few nanoseconds after the Big Bang to the birth of the stars, the formation of the solar system, planet Earth, and the emergence of evolution of life and all of human history. including the evolutionary significance of religion and science right up to you and me right now. I love that kind of stuff. Not everybody does. Some people don't like that kind of talk. Some people have a real issue with talking about science and religion in the same way. Some people don't like evolution. They've got things about that. But to me, all of it just sounds and feels like this really big, great story. It sounds an awful lot like the beginning of the Gospel of John. One of the things I like about the way Michael says all this is he says it in the same way that the beginning of the Gospel of John tries to tell the story that it's sort of the prelude to the whole gospel of what it's like. And it's this place where it takes this idea of life and light and mixes the two of them together. So I'll read that one for you too, because it reads pretty great. It reads like this. It's actually a piece of poetry. So it's better off if you'd hear it like a piece of poetry. It reads like this. In the beginning was the Word. Now, it's going to do a couple of things that are interesting. It's going to use the phrase word, and it's going to use the phrase life, and it's going to use the phrase light, almost interchangeably. It gets really funny at a couple of places. One of the things to remember in this is that in the Hebrew language, the word for word, a breath, and the word for light and the word for life are all really similar. So there's this interplay of these words. We like to divide those words into three different categories. Word or breath or spirit or wind are really different than life and light is really different than life, and life is going to have its own little... But in the Hebrew, these are much more similar words. So imagine you're hearing a Hebrew poem. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and all things came into being through him. And without him, nothing that has come into being came into being. And what has come into being in him was life, and that life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. It's like this big history story, that there was this breath, that there was this light, and then this life gave light to all things. So what gets interesting is not only Jesus using the phrase, you are the light of the world, in reference to the Hebrew notion of the Torah and the word of God and the calling of God and the breath of God and the instruction of God. That doesn't just end up being written down in a text and in a book and set away someplace. The Gospel of John wants to say, oh, that word, those things, that Torah, that teaching, that life, that's all in the world. It's sort of blowing around. It's funny that the Hebrew word for breath is this word of ruach, and you can sort of hear it in the creation myths and the creation narratives. The creation narratives want to say that like the wind of God, the breath of God is blowing over all the land, and then God speaks something into being, and it's as if the wind blows and creates this. It's a really creative kind of nuance. People like Michael and others who talk about the cosmos and where things came from, they start describing them in such similar ways. So if you're into like the poetry of the Bible, the poetry in the beginning of the Gospel of John, or the poetry in the gospel in the creation narratives, and you start talking about that with people who study the origins of the cosmos, it gets really interesting. You start talking in the same fields. Like there was this big mashup. There was all of this creative energy that was happening out of the Big Bang, and then out of that, light starts to form, and out of that light forms these electrons and protons and neutrons, and all that we have in the cosmos then is created in that. It's a really, like there are some things that the book of Genesis and the Gospel of John are not trying to do. They're not trying to describe like a sciencey way of that the world came to be. It's not trying to tell you how many days it took to make this or that, but it's actually telling this much bigger story, this, as my friend Michael likes to put it, this big history, or as the Gospel of John likes to put it, this big story of the light and the life and the word of God. So then you've got Jesus coming along. Now this is far before we know how light is made, how we know what light is. Like if you sit in this room and you look around and you see light, or you see light shining on a screen, or you see light coming from, I know in Seattle every once in a while the clouds break and there's that big Orbis ball in the sky. Well, that's the sun, and it sends light out and shines on all of you, right? Well, that light, what's happening is everything Are you ready for a little refresher on science class? Everything's made up of atoms in all the cosmos, right? And all atoms are constantly in motion, and waves and particles are the same things. Everything that's energy is particle, everything that's particle is energy. So this is all the same kind of thing. The way light gets made is when you start to heat up all those particles enough, and you get enough movement, one little photon leaves its orbit. Everything in an atom works in some kind of this symbiotic orbit that it's flying in, right up until the point that it doesn't. This is the great thing about life and light. Everything is dark right up until the point that something's no longer as it was. That light is made when things are no longer as they once were. So when these photons are moving in their orbit and then one of them leaves, that's what our eye registers as light. So there's lots of ways we get it. We heat up gas, or we heat up a filament, or we heat up biology. We make things glow. That glowing is when these little photons are leaving. And we get all of this rearrangements of photons to create light. Now, I don't know if Jesus was referring to something like that when he says, you know what you all are? You're like the light of God in the world. That you've got all this movement, you've got all this energy, there's all this stuff happening, and every once in a while some of that leaves, and we get to see the life and the light, the breath, the activity, the creative impetus of God. So Jesus is going about, right, and he's saying to people, I'm the light of the world. Now that's sort of a religious statement, maybe it's also a statement about what's happening. And then he says to these people, and so are you. You're the light of the world. You are the very activity of God in the world. That really changes the story. When the story is not just that we see the light, that we respond to the light, that we see things because of the light, those are all true too. T-Bone Burnett's a great musician. He's written lots of famous-y kinds of things. And he's Christian, but he doesn't write Christian music. He writes movies. He writes music for movies and for all kinds of things. He has this great line when people ask him why he doesn't write Christian music. And he says, well, if it's true that Jesus is the light, then we have two choices. We could just sing about the light, or we could sing about what we can see because of the light. It's really interesting. Right? There's like this dynamism of what we can see because of the light. So when Jesus starts using it, he's really mixing all of these ideas together. He's trying to say, look, as humanity, you are not just people who are going to see things because of God. Yes, you will. And you're not people who are only going to see the light of God in me. You are the light of the world. Some of you should just ponder on that for a bit. The disruptive nature, not just of what does it mean to put Jesus in the same place as all of authority of God, but then Jesus says, you are the light of the world. And you might want to think, well, you know what I should do? I should go back to my Bible and make sure that those are the same words. You should do that, because then you'll find out they're the same words. It's not some linguistic trick. It's a flip of the mind to understand that the very things that we try to say about Jesus, Jesus says about humanity. The story is not that there's a God in one realm of the cosmos and there's humanity in the other, and we're groping about in the darkness. Instead, the idea is that God and humanity are in this constant interplay. As we talked about a while back, in God, we live and move and have our being. So all of this emanating, all of this life, all of this comes to be. So that starts to implicate us. And here's the thing. Just because the light shines doesn't mean it's easy to figure out how. Doesn't mean it's easy to figure out what to do. Doesn't mean it makes all the sense in the world. It does make a big difference to know that we're going to shine, that we need to shine. And that every time you meet somebody, you say that, maybe you know this line from Desmond Tutu. Desmond Tutu has a line. He's a archbishop of the Anglican Church in South Africa and had a great bit to do with bringing peace to South Africa. And he says, if we truly understood Jesus' statement that all of humanity is the light of God, we would genuflect at meeting a stranger. We would see the other and we would say, you are the light of God. and it would change these relationships that we have with each other. Right? And my wife is a yoga instructor, and there's a common thing in yoga where people will say to each other, the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. They say it in another language, so it sounds much fancier than that. Namaste. Right? The divine in me recognizes the divine in you. And some people hear that kind of thing, and they're like, oh, well, I'm Christian. I don't do that. I don't do the Hindu sort of yoga thing, until they hear Jesus saying, you are the light of the world. I am the light of the world. You are the light of the world. Like, if it's easier to say to somebody, you are the light of the world, say that, because that sounds Jesus-like, and it's actually a really great story. But it's hard to figure out. I had this privilege of being in an event and speaking with on the same time on the same platform about 14 feet away from Desmond Tutu. It was a few years ago here in Seattle when there was this event called the Seeds of Compassion event with the Dalai Lama. So I'm at this thing, and I get to be one of the presenters with, like, the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, right? Which is not something I normally do, hang around world religious leaders, right? And I was totally out of my league, and just sort of like these guys know what it means to live the life and the light of God in the world. Like, they both brought about great things. The Dalai Lama is genius in so many ways. He represents spirituality to the Tibetans in a way that I just felt an honor to be near, even though I didn't understand it. And it's not sort of how I arrange my spirituality with a religious holy person who does it. There was just something about him. We were in a little meeting, and it was in a room with about 50 people in it or so. And I was sitting really close to Desmond Tutu and to the Dalai Lama. And they were on a little platform, kind of like the one I'm sitting on now, and they came in and they sat down, and these men have known each other a long time, and they're really playful with each other. They know each other well, they joke and they tease, and they would giggle all the time, and they would just sort of look at each other and start giggling. I mean, this is not what I expected it to be at all. And I was struck by a couple of things. I was struck that when both of them sat down, for Desmond Tutu, he had on pants and they pulled up, and for the Dalai Lama, he had on an outfit that pulled up, and I could see both of their shoes because I was sitting about 6 feet away from them. And I noticed that the Dalai Lama had Velcro shoes on, and that just sort of threw me. I'm like, seriously? Like, really didn't expect to see the Dalai Lama with a pair of Skechers on, these little Velcro shoes. So that kind of threw me. And then I watched them in their playfulness, and I knew the story, and they were telling stories about the work that they had done in bringing about freedom for people in China, and bringing peace in South Africa, and proclaiming goodness and peace in the world. And I love this statement of Desmond Tutu where he says, if you knew the light of God that was in every person, you would genuflect when you see him. And I thought, these are the guys that represent the goodness. Like, this is the kind of thing that we need more. Guys from two different perspectives that are finding the commonality and helping each other and growing. And I'm just inspired by the whole thing, right? And I'm sitting there, and then I look around the room, and over on the side, the Dalai Lama has people that are part of his security entourage, because he's also the head of a state. At least the United States considers him a head of state for the Tibetan people. So he has his own bodyguards with him, and they're dressed in their monk outfits, and they're actually pretty mean-looking dudes, at least to me. I mean, these were serious guys. And then next to them, I saw what were clearly U.S. Secret Service agents, because when you're a head of state, you get Secret Service protection in the United States. And the United States doesn't want, for all the people who want to see harm come to the Dalai Lama, they didn't want him to be assassinated, of course, in the United States. So he has Secret Service protection. So I look around and I see Secret Service agents here, Secret Service agents over here. And I was struck by something. Here these two men are that are proclaiming goodness and life and light and peace. Yet they're flanked by people who are prepared and trained to use lethal force to protect them. That threw me, confused me. I know what those Secret Service agents are wearing underneath their jackets. I know that even though I was sitting 14 feet away, if I'd gotten up and made a move toward that stage, I wouldn't have lived 1.2 seconds. They would have brought lethal, deadly force. It's confusing. We live in a world where the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness will not overcome it. But boy, there's an awful lot of tension in the world. I've become an unreasonable pacifist. So I don't kill bugs. I try not to. I won't kill animals. I'm not a good one or anything. I eat animals that are curated for me by other people, so I'm a hypocrite. But I just don't want to bring any death to anything. I don't want to be involved in violence. The only way I'm trying to figure out as a person in the world that wants to live out this life and light, and if I'm supposed to be the light of God in the world, which is a really difficult thing to say, right? I'm a person that's clumsy, and I hurt people's feelings, and I don't know anything, and I'm supposed to be going around as if like I'm God's light for the world. That's exactly the kind of thing Jesus says. So I've become this really committed person to life and light wherever it can be. So I don't want there to be any death or any violence or any guns or any of that stuff, right? I'm one of those people, that I'm just unreasonable to talk to about it. So, if you want to talk to me later and help me understand this better, you're welcome to, but it's not going to work because I'm just committed to being a pacifist. But sitting there in that room and realizing, boy, we need a lot more than two guys that shine their light in the world. Maybe this is what Jesus was getting at when he's like, hey, the story of God is that in God we live and move and have our being. And we need to shine the light of God. For when you shine the light of God, people will see the works of your Father in heaven. They'll give glory to God. They're going to get swept up in the God story too. That's what light does. It just brings life. It just pulls you in. It's just like the wind that pulls you and blows you and sends you, and you don't know where it's going or where it's coming from, and it pulls you. And I can't be that for all of the world, for everywhere. And that's not how God ever designed it. You are the light of the world. You are the light of God in the world. There have been roughly 108 billion people that have lived on this earth. That's a lot of people. Every second, 4 babies are born. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness will not overcome it. Now, the world is not yet as it's supposed to be. The world is not yet shining as bright as it ever will be. None of us should ever finish a day fully satisfied and say, well, nothing left to do. Of course not. That's not the point. The point is to be this activity, this movement, this life of God that reflects what we've read, that reflects the story we've been told, that reflects the life of Jesus in the world, and that we become those lights of God, the light of the world. The flip for the first century Christian was, could Jesus actually be the light of the world? And what does that mean for us? Are we too supposed to be the light of the world? The implications of how that makes us think about God and each other. I mean, we know this. This is sort of in our DNA. That's why when a baby is born, we cheer it on. Even though one's born, 4 of them are born every second. You see one and you're like, oh my lands. And that's why when someone dies in a way that they shouldn't, and you just know that light should not have been extinguished. That's why death hurts, birth inspires. Because we know this. But that story in our head that we know it to be true about them, and do we know it to be true about us? This is what I find so great about the Jesus narratives, is that it has this big, grand story, the big story of history, the total thing, like from the beginning of all things, the Word and the cosmos and the explosions and the movement and the life and the light. And it also has everything to do with the number of seconds and breath that we have in our lifetime. That we are part of this grand story in this amazing way that cheers on everyone as they shine light in the world. It's almost as if Jesus simultaneously says, I want to say something that is so mind-blowing, you're not going to possibly know what it means. And I want to say that same thing in a way that you say, well, if that's the way it is, then I'll live it the rest of my days. And that both of those are true. It's impossible. And I'm going to live it all of my days. It's almost like Jesus saying, your kingdom come and your will be done all over earth, like it is in heaven. So as you go into your reflection time, think about yourself as the light of the world. Think about other people you know as the light of the world. Who are those people that are that light? And are there people that you should say this to? Are there people that you should say to them what Jesus said to the followers on that field during the Sermon on the Mount? You're the light of the world. Like, there's a lot of things to talk about, and as people that gather in a church, you want to talk about lots of things. Like, Christianity is a big story. It's got lots. It wants to include all of us in all places, in all times, in all ways. There's also some really good Jesus-y things to go around saying to people. And if you want to pick up a Jesus-y thing to say this week, reflect on the times when you could say to people, you know what you are? You're the light of the world. You're the light of God in the world. I mean, that is stunning. Well, thanks again, everyone, for listening to the podcast. Thanks for making it all the way through. And hey, I'm running an event in Indianapolis in October called Open Faith. It's going to be the best event I've ever participated in. Would love to have you join us. You can find it at theopennetworkus.org/events. Theopennetworkus.org for Open Faith, or just Google Open Faith, and you'll see it there. Hey, we'll talk with you again next week. Thanks for listening.